So let us resume. We're gonna start off with where we ended off, which is that we're going to be going to our crafting widget. In the update recipes function, we are going to, after we've created the widgets and added them to our array, we're going to actually add them to our user interface. And we have something called a crafting item container, and this is where we actually hold our different widgets for the crafting items. It's the container over here, the horizontal box or vertical box that we created for that. So we want to grab the reference for that, and then we want to add a child. The add child function will allow us to add widgets to this vertical box. And the widget that we want to add is the one that we've just been created here. So we'll drag that one out, create some reroute nodes like this. So there we go, and now the widget should actually be spawning. So let's give that a quick try. Run up here, and you can see that we have two crafting items here now. They're going to be each represented for each of the recipes that we know. But they don't say the right text or anything like that right now, and we're going to be building on all of that logic and much more today. So before we continue doing that, we want to add another node here. We want to take our craft button, because the intention here is that when we have a recipe selected, or a crafting item as it's called in this widget, we want it to only allow us to craft whenever we have enough resources. But this is the starting state, so to speak. This is the update recipes is called whenever we have sent in new recipes or when the reference is constructed. Meaning that this is our starting state, as in everything should be fresh. So we will start off with actually setting this one enabled to false from here, so that the button will be disabled to begin with. And I'm talking about this craft button over here. Later on we will be adding logic to actually make this enabled at some point, but this is good for now for us to have, so we don't have to do it later on. While we are in this widget, we might as well also go to our close crafting button and click on the on-clicked event here. So we have that. So this will be the event that we click, or that is generated when we click on the closing of the crafting widget. And this is where we will be shutting everything down. So let's create a function, because it might be that we want to call this from other pieces of code. So having a custom function that's called close crafting UI, for example, will allow us to call this from different locations if we wanted to. So we'll call this, and they will be acting in the same way, which means that you don't have to repeat code. So close crafting UI like that will be fine. And what we want to do in the closing of the crafting UI is we want to set the visibility of this widget itself. So set visibility, and we want to say that we want it to go back to being hidden. After that, we want to make sure that the input mode is reset again, so we get our owning player. And from this we say set input mode game and UI. So, and after that we also want to clear out our widgets that will hold the details of what resources are needed to be crafted. We haven't created that one yet, so we'll wait with that a little bit. But as a last part, we also want to make sure that we are hiding the mouse cursor at this point. So show mouse cursor, the set function or the set variable for it, and we set that to false. So let's start off with creating the the functions we can call it for later on, or so we can call it now and then create the logic for it later on. So it is the widget that's going to be called crafting details. This one. So this widget, we want to have a function in that will essentially clear out all the information that it has. We can remove these. So we'll make a custom event and we call this close details. Again, you can rename this later on if you feel that you have better names. And we want to get a container here where we hold everything and clear out the content of that. So we created a vertical box here earlier. So if we make this a variable and call it crafting details container. Now we have a variable that we can make use of, a handle to it. So we get that one over here and we simply just say clear children. This will make it so that when this function is called, it will remove all of these different items in here and it will just be the default widget, which is in our case is nothing, but you could have like a background that's like blank or something like that. So that's all good and fine. Now we have that available to us. We can go back to our crafting again. And in our crafting widget, we can now make use of this method. So we have our crafting details reference. We'll get that one. And we just say close details. So, and that should be all of that functionality essentially. So now we are hopefully able to close down our user interface. So let's try that out quickly and see if that works. So what's happening here is the craft button is disabled because that's how we set it up, and then we can click close, and after that we can move around normally again. There. So let's start working on these buttons that you can click on to start crafting recipes, so we can see if we are actually supposed to enable the craft button, and also so we can display the resources or components you need to do the craft. To do this, we open up our widget for our crafting item and we go in here. While we are in here, we can go to our button over here and we can click on the on-clicked event. Can remove some of these events that we're not going to be making use of. Keep the constructed one because we can put some code in there. So this has a recipe exposed on spawn, so when you create the widget you can populate it, which means that we can make use of that for our constructor here. So we can say when we construct it, we get the recipe and we can break it up. So we get the components from it. From that we can get the actual crafted items or crafted item and break that one up as well. Then we get this structure. This structure contains the name, which allows us to bring that out. So we can do, let's see, we take the, did we not create one yet? It seems we did not. Or maybe we just didn't make a variable of it. Crafting item. So this is the actual description of the item. So we can make this a variable and call it something. We can call it crafting item name. That's descriptive enough, I think. Now we have crafting item name over here. We can bring that out, make a get. We can type in set text. So we get this set text widget. And then we hook that up. Now that we have that hooked up, we want to make this name show up as a description. However, since this is an enumerator, we want to drag off from it and type in toString. You get these two values. The first one will be a user-friendly value, which means it will be the text. This to string down here will just give you the value of it, so like a 0, 1, 2, depending on the index in the enum, so that's not very useful to us. So we'll get the first one that's user-friendly, and from that we can drag it into the text here, and we'll get the converter to make it to the string type that we need, or from the string type to the text type that we need. So now we have the construction which will allow our widget to show up with its name. So if we go in here and we start and we run up to the crafting table, we see that we get a recipe for wall and a recipe for wooden board now. So that's good. Next, let's go to this button here. So when we click on the button for a recipe, what we want to do is we want to determine are we able to craft this? And how we're going to do that is we are going to determine if, since this is the user interface, it doesn't know about our inventory, doesn't know about our crafting system, but we want to allow it to find out what number of resources we have available so that we can see if we have enough to actually make any crafts happen. Since this is sort of a function to determine how many crafts we can make, that's sort of a useful function that we might want to have in different places. We will be creating a library for this so that we can call it from different places. So if we go to blueprints and blueprint function library, we can call this bpfl underscore crafting. That should be good enough, since we will be keeping our crafting related functions here. Now inside of here we're going to be making a few different functions. To start off with, we can create the one that we have been talking about, called determine number of crafts possible. That's a very descriptive function name. This function, we want to take in an input of an actor. Since it's an actor component, it will be attached to an actor. So this will be the actor that has the resources, essentially. So we can call it actor with resources. In addition to that, we want to send in a recipe. A recipe holds all the information that we need, so we type in our S recipe. And we can call this just recipe. Since the recipe itself contains both the item that we're crafting and the items that you need, then this is all the information that we need to send in here, essentially. But immediately we realize we want to know what are the resources that are available on the character that is trying to do the crafting. Well, to do this, we're going to create another interface. This interface, we are going to go over here and create the interface blueprint interface. We can call this BPI resource query. So since we're essentially asking for what resources are available, this is a descriptive name. We can call the function query resources available. And we want this function to get in one parameter, which is the actual recipe, so S recipe. And the reason we're sending in this parameter is because we want to, we can call it recipe also, we want to have all the things that are necessary for us to be found, and the recipe contains all the components. So that's why that is useful here. In return, we want to have an array sent back to us, and we want the array to be of the type S inventory item, because the inventory item is the one that contains both the item and how many of it you have. So we can name this resources available, like so. Now, to be able to make use of this, we need to actually implement it in our third person character, because that's who the user interface will be sending the information, or the function library will be sending the information to. So we'll go to our class settings and we immediately add this resource query interface here. And then we can also go and implement that. So open graph. There we go. Now that we have this function here, what we're going to be doing is we are the function library that's sent this message doesn't really care about where you have your resources available. So now it's up to the character to actually define where can we get this information, essentially. And we know that we have our resources in our inventory system. So we are going to be getting our inventory system. And then from here, we're going to get information. So I don't think I have, there we have it, get specific inventory item. So this is a function that exists already. So if we double click in on it, we can see this is the information it has. It takes a item name here and it goes through the inventory, and then if it finds something in the inventory that's matching the name, it says that it has found the item, and then it returns that item. We could also be making this a break, but we'll keep it like it is for now, I guess. So calling this item or this function will get us the information that we need as long as we have the name here. So to get to the name, we can disconnect this for now. We can get the recipe, and we can actually do it like this. We can split the struct so we get the components that it has, and these crafting components are what we are after. So we can loop on this, like so. The loop body will go in here and get this information. The array over here we can again split struct for, and we get this information. The array element item here we can again do a split struct on, and then we'll get the actual array element item name, the enum that we're after. So this is how we can find that specific item. Now that we have this, we want to keep track of it, so we'll create a local variable. We can call this, I tend to like to have a prefix of local to all my local variables, so I know that they're local just by looking at them. So we can call it local resource result. And local resources result is going to be of a type of S inventory item, essentially returning to us how many we have of each item. So we do that, we'll get a reference over here. We will do an add, we want a unique, we only want to keep track of one, like so, and then we add the requested item there. When we're done with this loop, we will return here and we will bring with us the local result that we gathered in this function. There we go. Okay, so now we have this function available to us that we want to call on. So we can say query resources available on the character and send in the recipe. The third person character will get the query resources available, go through all of the different components that it wants. It will send each of them one at a time to its inventory and say, how many do I have of this specific item? And we'll return that value here, and then we'll return it from this function back to our function library. Our function library now needs to determine, based on the resources we have available, are we actually able to craft an item? So we'll create another function that will determine that as well for us. So we can call this one calculate craftable amount. Like so. And this function will take first an input of inventory items, essentially saying these are the items that I have on hand. So type in s inventory item to get that and make it an array because we will have multiples possibly. And we call it available resources. In addition to that, we also want to have a recipe to match this against. So we type in s recipe because we want to see what are the items that are required to craft. Like so. And compile and save. So in here we have our recipe, and we want to go through all the different components that are required to craft this recipe, and then we want to match it against our available resources. We need to make sure that each individual component is available and that we have sufficient amount for it. Otherwise we're not able to craft this. So we can drag out the recipe first and break it, because then we get the components available to us. Then we can start off with a loop for that, like so. So now we will be looping on the recipe components that we need. So now we could create a helper function here, and because we want to determine a bunch of different things here, and we can make this a function that we can make use of in different places. We want to first of all find out if we found a result that's matching. We want to know how many times how many items of the craft we can make with this specific resource, because maybe you have a lot of one resource. You can craft 5 of an item if you have just that resource in consideration. But you have a different item that you have much fewer of, which allow you to only craft the item 2 times. So out of these 2, you have to make use of the lowest divisor, so the 2, to determine how many crafts you actually have available to you. So let's actually do that. First we can add our output so we know what we're actually after in this specific function. So we'll add a integer, and we can call this the available crafts. So this is the goal. To get there, we need to find out how many we can do for one specific item. So we'll add another function here. We call it determine number crafts for specific crafting components. That's a very long name, but yeah, that will describe essentially what we're trying to do. And this function, what it will do is it will take a bunch of resources and match it against one specific resource essentially. So we can take an S item. No, an S inventory item is what we want. Yes, and we want to have that as an array. We can call this our resources available. We had another one, and this one we don't make an array, but we want to have it of the same type, and we say this is the component to craft. Okay, so the very first thing we want to do is we want to find out how many of the item do we need. So let's create a local variable. We call it local resources required. We make it an integer because it can only be whole numbers. And we set this value. This value we get from the component that we're trying to craft. If we break that up, then we take the amount from that. So that's the very first thing that we will do. Next is to actually start matching the resources. So we have our resource available over here. We say that we want to loop with a break, because we only need to move around until we've found it once and then we break off. And that is because of how the inventory system is written here, because the inventory system is very simple in the way that you have one inventory item slot essentially, and it has all of the quantity in that slot. If you were to have a different inventory system that had a little bit more complex functionality, as in you could have multiple slots for the same item, like maybe a certain amount of stacks in each stack, then you will have to write this code a little bit differently to determine how much you have available to you. Anyway, so the first thing we want to do is we want to do a matching of this. So we take the current loop element that we're running on and we break that, because we're after the actual name, and we can find the name in the item if we split the struct over there. So we need to do the same with this one over here. So if the in parameter here, go over here and we break this as well, and we split struct of this one as well. So now we have the two different things that we want to compare, so let's compare them. So if the name is matching, that's the first criteria. So we'll add a if statement over here. However, there is one more thing we want to check also. We want to make sure that the value that we have from the required amount is not 0, because we're going to try and find the divisor. So if we have 0, it would be trying to divide by 0, which is a big no-no. So we'll make sure that we don't have that by making a not equal. Then we'll drag the first boolean node here, and we'll type in and, so and boolean, and then we plug in both of these comparisons, and then we plug that into our if statement. So both of these need to be true for this to be okay. So next step from that is we're going to say that, okay, we actually found a result that's matching now, so we can add another variable, local result found. We'll make that a boolean, and we'll set it to true. Since we are only looking to find one item, so this will be, when it first hits, it will say that it's done, so that's good for us, so that will work. We also need to keep track of how many of the resources are available, which we now know because we have this item which is matching. So we'll add another local variable. We call it local resources. That's not how we spell it. Resources available. We make that an integer, and we set that as well. We set this to be the value of the amount of the value of the current loop item that we're comparing against, because that's the one that's matching and that's the one that contains our information. So that's what we have available. We did find something, and we have also earlier set how many we are needing to do this. So lastly, what we need to do is we need to keep track of our divisor that we talked about. So we'll make another local divisor, and we'll set that as well. It will also be an integer, and the local divisor will be the local resources available divided by local resources required. And that's how many times we can craft this. So that's what we're accomplishing here. Then we can drag the set node here, because we have actually determined that we have found it, so we don't need to loop anymore. It's very good to make sure that you don't loop more than you actually need to, because a loop is something that the system feels that it needs to complete before it goes to the next frame. So if you have loops in loops or something that has gone out of control, then it would like freeze your system until it's done with all the computations that you have. We don't want that to happen. Let's see here, do we have a return node? We do not yet, so we'll add a return node. And there we go. So now we just need to send all of this information out. So we can take our local result found, send it out. We can take our local divisor, send it out. We can take our local resources required, our local resources available, and make sure that all of those are being sent in here. And before we leave, we also want to make sure that it's named something better. So result found. This we can just call divisor. This one we can call resources required. And this one we can call available resources. Like so. So now we have that function available to us. So we can go back now to our code in the determine number of crafts for specific crafting. No, this one is the one. Is it? Yes. So now that we have this information, we want to call calculate craftable amount. Sending it in like so, and we're sending a recipe in there as well. So we're saying out of the resources that we have available, let's see how many times we can craft it. How many times can we craft it? Well, it depends on this code. Because in here we are going to go through the helper function that we just created. So let's drag out our method here for determining the number of crafts per crafting component. So this is what we get. So we'll just plug in our loop body in here and our array element into the component to craft. And our available resources from the input here is what we're going to be using to feed this helper method. So each time it will check against one component, and then it will go through all the resources available to determine what kind of a result we have. After that, we will just make a branch to use our result found here to determine if we have found something, we want to save what the local, what the lowest divisor is, and we'll make a local variable for this. And call it local lowest divisor. We'll make it an integer, and we'll say if we have got a result, so a result that's true, then we want to save the divisor that we got from the helper method. But there could be a chance that we might not have this resource available in here, which means we would get a result found false. And for that case, our divisor will be 0 because we don't meet the requirements of crafting that specific part or component, essentially. So this is all the code that this needs to do. Now we just need to return from here and return. We shouldn't have this though, I think. Oh, never mind. Of course, this is correct because the divisor will actually represent how many times we can craft this item since we're going through all the objects. So this is all good and fine. So we'll do it like this and compile and save. So with all of this created, we can finally go back to our crafting item and actually make use of some of the functionality here now. So this is representing when you click on a specific widget, so one specific recipe in the crafting bar. And what we essentially want to do here is now make use of the function that we did, which is to determine number of crafts possible. And the reason for this is we want to see, are we actually able to craft this at all, essentially. So we need to also get onion player, and we need to get its pawn. Pawn. Control pawn should get it. Get control pawn. And the reason for this is that we said in the function library here that the determine number of crafts possible, that we need to send in an actor with assets. And that is what this character is. So this will be the character that gets the check for what kind of resources it has available. It's being used for the interface called here, query resources. So this actor that gets this needs to have this interface implemented for it to be able to return any resources, and that is why this reference is being used. For the recipe, we are actually inside of a button that has the recipe, so this is what we'll make use of. We'll use the exposed spawn on variable, like so. And now we need to communicate back to the widget above, which is the crafting widget, this one. And that's, we have determined something from this. There seems to be, however, that I forgot something here. Yep. So this one is not completely, so we'll have to continue with this first. Yeah. The only thing we should be missing here is this for a return node. Let's just do a return. So, and say we want to have that variable. So this will represent our crafts that we are able to create here. And going back now to our crafting item, this is what we have now. So, now with the crafting returning unavailable crafts here, what we want to do is we want to communicate back to the widget above about how many crafts we have here. Because we want to essentially tell it, are we able to make more than 0 crafts, and only then enable the button for the crafting to be available. To accomplish this, we will be making use of an event dispatcher. First, we'll just make a quick check here against this one being above 0 or not. After that, we create our event dispatcher. So we can call this event dispatcher something like crafting item selected. And we want to add inputs to it. So what we want to return here is, among other things, if this is craftable. And that will be a boolean. And a second thing we will want to add here is the actual recipe. And this will be useful later. So we'll add a recipe structure and just type in recipe. Doing this will allow us to communicate which of the recipes were selected in other parts of blueprints, so we have it conveniently handy. So we'll just call this now by dragging it out and use the call. For the true version of this branch, actually, let's save some space here. We can actually cut this out and just plug in the boolean node directly like this, and then we'll get a true if it was above 0 anyway, and false if it was not. It seems like I did not save our... Okay, I need to compile to get the correct name there, I thought, but something else. Okay, so this one thinks it's a different event dispatcher because I didn't compile and save before dragging it out. But since I have now compiled and this is the correct interface we have here, we should just be able to refresh this node so it will get updated properly here, and we can continue on. Like so. So that's all good and pretty. So this is what will happen when we click the button. Now we need to tell the crafting widget, which is the one we want to listen to this, to actually do that. So going back to our crafting, we have this update recipes function here. And this is the function we know that we will be calling every time when we are updating our view, either when we're bringing it up for the first time or another time when we have had it opened at the previous time when the reference is okay. So we want to add some code here essentially, and we have our reference to our widgets over here, which allows us to actually bind to this event. So if we type in bind craft bind event to crafting item selected, we get this available to us, and we'll just hook it up like so. And now we need to define what kind of an event will run when this happens. So we'll give ourselves some space. Actually, let's make use of this space as well. So we'll just drag off this node and add an event, a custom event, and we'll get the interface for it. And something we can call this is craft item selected. So this is the event that will trigger every time we're clicking on a recipe essentially in the crafting. So now we're getting a boolean here, which allows us to see if it's craftable or not, which is great, because then we can take our craft button and say that this should be enabled, so set is enabled to be whatever the boolean is that we're getting from this event dispatcher. And in addition to that, we also have the recipe getting in here, and a good thing for us will be to keep this stored for now. So we can have a selected recipe variable of the type S recipe, and we'll make sure to set this to be the recipe that we're getting in from the event dispatcher as well. Like so. Now, the very last thing we want to do now is we have disabled the button if we're not able to craft it. We have enabled the button if we are able to craft it. But now would be a good time to make use of the information that is needed to craft this item. So now would be a good time to have a function for that. So I don't think we have created one yet. So let's do that now. We can call it custom event and show crafting details. So now we have that as a function, or event rather. We now can call that from over here. Show crafting details. And again, we're doing a separate function or a separate event in this case, just so that we can have it be called here and from somewhere else and have the exact same logic being run essentially. So what do we want in this function, or this event rather? Well, a lot of things. We will need to first get our let's see, where is it? Don't we have one yet? Over here we have a crafting details, W crafting details, there it is. So we right click on this to make sure it's a validated get, to make sure that we're actually using a proper value for a reference. Another thing would be, it would be good if we had recipe passed in here. So let's make sure to add that to our event, a recipe. Actually, we don't really need that since we already saved it as a selected recipe. Yeah, let's remove that. Let's just take our selected recipe here instead. Okay. So, with this available to us now, what we essentially want to do is a few things. We want to display all the information that we have, which is in the recipe, which is the required items that we need to have. But we also want to query for our resources again to make sure that we are getting those, because we need to show both how many are needed, but also how many we have, right? So we will do the same thing that we did before. If we have this reference, well, actually, regardless if we have this reference or not, we're going to want to query the resources. But in one of these events, we're going to be needing to create the crafting widget detail as well. So let's go here and do that. Create crafting, right, crafting, create widget, of course. And here we want to have the crafting details one. Now, this one doesn't have a whole lot of information either, but we know that it will be needing a few things. It will be needing the resources and it will be needing the recipe. So we can make sure to go into the crafting details one. And here we can add some variables. We say recipe, make it of the type as recipe. And we also add another variable for resources, and we make this of the type as inventory and make it an array. Then we also make sure to make both of these instance editable and expose them on spawn, so we are going to get them available to us in the creation of this crafting widget. So we refresh this, we get the new variables. For the recipe, we can just drag in our selected recipe. And for our resources, we need to query for them. So we get our owning player again. We get its pawn. And we query. Give ourselves a little bit of space. Make sure to do this first, because the query result here is what we need in the creation of the widget. And this query also needs to get what resources are required essentially by type of recipe. So we send that in there as well. And now we can actually copy this code, because this code will be the same, the valid section as well. Like so. So now we want to either update the crafting details with this information, or we want to set the information here to be proper, which means that we would be taking the crafting details, and we're setting that reference over here now. And then we want to take that reference also and add it to our horizontal box, which we have called, sorry, our vertical box. Right? Let's see here. I'm doing it right here. Vertical box is that one. Horizontal box. It should be in here in the bottom. No, that's not right. Let's see here. Vertical box. No. Horizontal box over there. This is the one. Right. So this is the level. So next to the vertical box. So this one is the one we need to have a variable for. So we make that one a variable. We call it the crafting container, I guess, since it contains everything. So like so. Compile, save. That didn't work. It's not happy with the query resources. That makes sense because we didn't give it a target. Like so. And now that we've done that, we can compile, and we can also take our crafting container and we can say add child to horizontal box, and we send in the reference to the widget we just created. So now we have that one saved over there. So now we essentially just need to create a way to update this widget when we're just updating it with information here. Let's see if we have, so far we have not, it looks pretty clean. So we'll add that functionality now then, I guess. So create a custom event and we call it update. And we make sure that it gets some inputs. We get a recipe and we also need resources. So as inventory in the form of an array. And we name them resources available and recipe. There we go. And we do have a crafting details container here, where we will be putting all of the information about the different crafting parts. This container, we can take and clear all the children of it, making sure that it's completely clean and empty when we make use of it. And then we want to go through all the different components in the recipe. So we'll break this and we'll loop on the crafting components, because each of these we want to display. So what we want to do is we want to create a crafting details widget for each of these. So create widget and crafting details item or component if you want to rename later on. And again, this one is very empty and it would want to have some information. So this represents one line, meaning one of these rows. So we want to have the information about the description. We want to have the resources available and how many are required to craft it. So let's go ahead and create that. We open up the widget for crafting details item. And we say we can remove the tick and the pre-construct. And in here we can make a few variables. So we can have resource description. And we can also make that to text, I guess would make sense. And then we can make another one and we can call this resources available. Resources available. And we'll make that an integer. Then we'll make another one and we'll say that this is the resources required. Like so. I'll make sure that all three of these are instance editable and exposed on spawn. Then we go back to our crafting details and we update the widget and we have some information here. And where we get this information is from each of these elements. We can determine the number of crafts for a specific component that we made earlier. So determine number of crafts for a specific component. Yeah. And what it needs is the resources available, which we have as input from the function. And event. And in addition to that, it also wants to know which component to craft. And the component to craft is the one that we're currently looping on in the loop. So out from this, we get a bunch of information. Resources required, for example, we can send that in there. Resources available, we can send in there. The resource description itself, we can get from the currently looped on item and break it. And then if we take and split the struct on the item name, we get the actual enumerator. And we'll go and type into a string for that one. Take the first result, and then we drag it in there so it gets converted to the text. Like so. Okay, so this should essentially be creating one of these children now. Now what we need to do is add it to our container that we have. So we'll take our crafting details container and we'll add child. And we hook up the reference to the widget we just created, like so. So now it will be going through each of these different components and creating one of these widgets and adding it. So we need to make sure to make use of this in our crafting an item widget right now. To make sure, no, not the crafting item, the crafting details item, sorry. So we're getting these variables sent in now, but we need to actually make use of them as well. And that's not especially difficult. All we need to do is, like before, we create a custom event. So we have an event to call on, and we call it update. So that's easy to understand. We call the update from the construct. So we can either get it called from when it's constructed or when it's being updated manually. Either way, it will have the correct information in these fields now. So if we take the resource text, which represents the how many resources are required as opposed to are used, and we can go ahead and set the text for this one. And we'll drag this out and say format text. And we'll get this nice little bar, which allows us to be a little bit dynamic about our text. So we will type in here this, not square brackets, but other parentheses. I'm not sure what it's called right now. Anyway, you see which sign I mean here, and we can just type in resource required and then end with an opposing one, and then we have a slash added, and then we start again and we type in resources available, for example. So by pressing enter now, you can see that each of these will form a variable or an input for us to feed in. So we can take our resources available and the resources required, and we'll just plug them in as they correspond to the names. Of course, if you want a different formatting, this is where you would be doing that, like so. In addition to that, we also want to set the description, so we get the resource description text, and we type in set text for that one as well. And for this one, we drag in our resource description and plug it in. And that is essentially all we need to do on the crafting details item. So now in theory, I think we should have enough for us to be able to test this a little bit. So if we just run over here and we press E, you see we get a wall and a wooden board, and if we click something, nothing is happening. Currently we still have all of this, so we have a little bug when it comes to that. Let's see what happens when we pick up all of the items. And we go in and we click, and now the crafting button is lighting up properly, but we're not populating our crafting details correctly currently. So let's fix this. So let us start with our crafting widget. That seems to be the most logical place of something going wrong. So let's see if we're getting this event to fire like we want to. We add a breakpoint here. Sorry if I went too fast. We're adding a breakpoint at the event that gets called on the event dispatcher, the craft item selected. So let's play and we'll run up to the board. We'll press a button and we see craft item selected gets called, so that's good. We're setting the enabled button, we're setting the recipe, we're going into show crafting details. We're going to the validated get, we're querying this. Okay, here's the problem. We haven't completed this code, so let's continue here then. So what we essentially want to do is we created the update method on the widget. So we have the widget over here. Just type in update. And then we send in information. So resources available. And the recipe is a selected recipe. We can just take it, make a copy, like so. And let's try this again. So we click on a button, let's do resume and see what happens. And now we can see we are displaying how many resources are required for each of the different items and how many we have ourselves. So we don't have enough on ourselves for this item, one would think, but the craft button has been enabled for some reason anyway. So let's do that again and see why that is. So we start, we click on the wall, we go over to show crafting details, we query the resources. Right, did we check craftable true? So that seems incorrect. So we should check what the matter is there. So this would be the crafting detail, crafting item in here. So when we click on a button, this is what happens. So we're in the crafting item widget now, and we want to see exactly what this is returning. So we'll press play. We will click on wooden board, for example. Actually, we should be consistent and click on the same thing. So let's actually restart this to make sure we don't have too many variables that are moving around. So we click wall. We go in here. We know that we have some of the components, but not all of them. So we step into. Actually, let's step out and just make sure that it looked all right there. So now we are outside and available crafts is 1. It thinks we can craft 1, which is not correct. Okay, let's try again. Click the wooden wall. We step into it and we go through and we say we want to have all the resources available. Now this might be okay, well that doesn't look. Yeah, that actually looks sort of correct. We have a hammer, although we have a blank item also, which is a bit of a problem, I guess. Well, not maybe a problem, but yeah. We'll see about that later on. So we have a hammer available to us. One of the items we picked up was a hammer, or the only item we picked up. And we need to complete this recipe, which is more difficult to read out, but essentially it says we need to have hammers, 1, we need to have nails, 4, and we need to have that looks like maybe a problem also. Crafting components. Seems like possibly the first element is a little bit incorrect. So let's see if we can figure this out. Let's run this one more time. And we'll press the wall. We'll step over. Step into. Step over. Step over, step into. And here we need to loop through all the different elements of the recipe. And see if we get a result. We get a result that's true. We get a divisor that's 0. Okay. Slight mistake here. The divisor is supposed to be the lowest one, which means that it should always only be... let's do this. We set the local divisor to be something high, like 999. And then we say we want to have the minimum value of this one and the current local divisor. So if we get a, okay, not sure what graphical error that was, but yeah. So if we get a divisor here that says it's 100, then we'll set 100, since 100 is lower than 999, we'll set that as our lowest divisor. So we'll always keep track of the lowest one, because it will be always the lowest one that will determine how many crafts we have. In this case, we got one of the result, which was 0, and we didn't have this check and this minimum setting, which meant that the only local divisor that we actually set was the last result found, essentially, that was available. So this should hopefully be a better result. So we press wall, we can do resume, and we do resume and resume. And now we can see that the craft button is not enabled like it should be. We can close that. So that's good, at least. Now that it's starting to look like it's working properly. Proceeding from here, we should open up the widget for crafting, because now that we have created these bindings for the craft item selected, we also need to make sure that we're actually cleaning them up, because this is being referenced to each of the different widget references. And when we're recreating this all the time, even though we're removing the widgets themselves by resetting them over here, it's good practice to at least clean up yourself when you have things like this. So what we can do is we can actually go through the widget reference list that we have and make a loop of it and make sure that we are actually cleaning these binds up by dragging up unbind events from crafting selected. We can take the event one to be specific in this case, because if we want to have more binds, then it would unbind all of them. And now we need to hook this up, so we can, I guess we can drag all of it over here, and then maybe have some reroute nodes, make it look a little bit better. Something like that maybe will work. Like that. So we go through all of the widget references that we have, if we have any, we loop on them, we unbind each of them, and after we have done that, we continue from here with the code of clearing it, looping through all of the recipes, creating a recipe widget for all of them, adding them to our list, making sure that we bind them for the event dispatcher if we need it, and then we add that child to our container in the widget, and then we set the button to be unchecked or unenabled in the beginning, because we don't have anything selected when we are opening it up. And then we have this, which runs whenever we click on a recipe, which checks if we can craft something, and then sets it as our currently selected recipe, and then we show the details of the craft themselves. So essentially the components for everything that we're crafting. So let's start cleaning up some of the bugs we've encountered. So when we play and we go to the crafting table, we immediately see that the crafting details are being shown immediately. Now this is not what we want, of course. So if we go to our crafting details, which is that part, we have the update here doing the clear children immediately, but our construct is not calling our update. So we'll do that, and we'll send in the recipe and the resources, and we try again. That should hopefully have fixed it. Yeah, so now we don't have a details available to us. So now if we press, we should also remove these breakpoints, resume, remove, resume, and remove and resume. So now we get our details there. We close, we run up to it again. We get a duplication of all of the recipes that we craft. So that's something we need to fix as well. So we'll go into our crafting widgets, updating of the recipes. We go through all the references of the widget, we unbind them, we clear them, we loop at the recipes, create widgets. There's one thing we're not doing here, however. We're never clearing out the crafting item container. So this one we should also clear the children of, or we will be creating widgets upon widgets in that one. Like that. Let's try it again and see what happens. So we click on the wall, we close it down, we click craft again, we only see these, and everything seems to be working fine. We can pick up all of these items. We can run up here and click, and now we have a wooden wall and we're able to craft it. And now when we click something, nothing happens, of course. So that's what we will start on working on in the next part. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments you have down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. That is all for now. Keep on learning. Take care.